Hello and welcome to Lesson 9.1B. I've entitled this video, Alexander Hamilton's Vision. This video is going to cover pages 249 to 251. The new economy. As president, Washington focused on foreign affairs and military matters. He rarely suggested new laws and almost always approved the bills that Congress passed. For the government's economic policies, the president depended on Alexander Hamilton, Secretary of the Treasury. Hamilton was in his early 30s when he took office, but he had bold plans and clear policies in mind. Hamilton faced a difficult task. The federal and state governments had borrowed money to pay for the American Revolution. They now owed millions of dollars to other countries and to American citizens. As a result, the nation faced serious financial trouble. Hamilton tried to improve the government's finances and strengthen the nation at the same time. Question number 1. Whose advice did President Washington trust on America's economic issues and policies? His Secretary of Treasury, Alexander Hamilton. Question number 2. What was a huge task facing the Secretary of Treasury, Alexander Hamilton? Well, the states and the federal governments were both in debt. They had borrowed a lot of money to pay for the war, and now they owed all that money, and it was time to pay that back, and that was going to cause them a lot of stress. Hamilton's plan. The House of Representatives asked Hamilton to make a plan for the adequate support of the public credit. This meant that the United States needed a way to borrow money for its government and economy. To be able to borrow in the future, the government had to prove it could pay back the money it already owed. Hamilton proposed that the federal government take over and pay off the states' wartime debts. He argued that paying off the debt as a nation would build national credit and make it easier for the nation to borrow money. Hamilton also believed that federal payment of state debts would give the states a strong interest in the success of the national government. Question 3. What were two things that the House of Representatives wanted Hamilton to figure out? Well, number 1, he wanted Hamilton to be able to figure out how could we get adequate support of public credit for the United States? Like, how could we find a way to borrow money for the government and its economy? And secondly, how could we prove to other countries that we could pay back our debts that we already owed? Question 4. What was the solution that Alexander Hamilton proposed? He proposed that the federal government do what's called debt consolidation. Take every debt owed by the states, take all that debt and claim it as America's debt. So the federal government would take over all the debt owed by the states, and each state owed different amounts of money, and he said, I don't care. We're going to assume all that debt as America's debt because we're in this together as one nation. Question number 5. What were the 3 main benefits that Hamilton saw with his proposal? Well, number 1, he saw that as a way to build our national credit. Number 2, he saw it as a way to make it easier for our nation to borrow money in the future. And number 3, he felt that if the federal government did that for the states themselves would want to see the national government work because they were now in this together with these other 12 states. And so he felt like that would bring us together as a country, not as a loose confederation of states, but as a United States of America. The plan faces opposition. Congress agreed to part of Hamilton's plan, to pay the money owed to other nations. However, Hamilton's plan to pay off the debt owed to American citizens caused protest. When borrowing money from citizens during the American Revolution, the government issued bonds. These are notes that promise repayment of borrowed money in the future. While waiting for repayment, many bond owners, shopkeepers, farmers, and soldiers, sold their bonds. They accepted less money than the bond's stated value. Often, the buyers of these bonds were speculators, people who risk money in hopes of making a large profit in the future. Now, Hamilton was proposing to pay off the old bonds at full value. This would make the speculators rich. The original bondholders would get nothing. Many people were upset by this idea. One newspaper said Hamilton's plan was, quote, established at the expense of national justice, gratitude, and humanity. Question number 6. What is a bond? A bond is a note that promises repayment of borrowed money in the future. So you could spend $50 on a bond today, and you're giving that money to somebody like a government, and then in 5 years that government pays you $100. So you gave them $50 today to be paid back double in 5 years. So that would be called a bond. Question 7. How did America borrow money from citizens during the Revolutionary War? Well, our government issued bonds, and citizens bought those bonds and gave the government that money then, because our government needed that money then to fight the British. Question number 8. Why did many of the bond owners sell their bonds for less money than the bonds were worth? Well, they were wondering, would we ever get paid? And sometimes people feel like money now is better than possible money in the future. So many of those bond owners sold their bonds at less value than they were actually worth just to get that money at that time, like right away. Question number 9. What is a speculator? A speculator is someone who takes a risk. They risk money now in the hopes of making a large profit in the future. So they're a little bit like a gambler, but they feel it's less of a gamble. They feel like their money now could get them a big payoff in the future. So a little bit like a gambler. Question number 10. Which group of people would benefit the most from Hamilton's plan, and which group of people would get nothing? So if Hamilton's plan was accepted, the speculators would be paid off handsomely. They would be getting all that money that they had hoped for, and the people that would kind of get gypped in this would be the people that sold their bonds originally. So they didn't get the full value of that bond, and now the speculators were going to. So some of the people didn't think that was fair. Even stronger opposition came from the southern states. These states had accumulated or built up much less debt than the northern states. Several had already repaid their debts, yet Hamilton wanted the entire nation to pay all the debt together. Southern states complained about having to help pay other states' debts. And so you can start to see the differences between the North and the South. First, we had the issue of slavery, and here you can start to see the cracks in the relationship as the northern states were going to benefit from Hamilton's plan, and many southern states felt like this plan wasn't going to help them at all or very much. So question number 11, why did the southern states complain about Hamilton's plan? Well, those states didn't feel like, well, why do we have to have the government help the North? We already did our job of helping pay down our debt or not have as much. It seems like this plan is helping the North at the expense of the South. So they were frustrated by that. Compromise and a capital. To win support for his plan, Hamilton worked out a compromise with Southern leaders. If they voted for his plan to pay off the state's debts, he would support locating the nation's capital in the South. Question number 12. We have talked about this word a lot this year. What does the word compromise mean? A compromise is when two sides agree to something and where both sides give up a little to get a little. So two or more sides disagree on something and they find a way to agree on it by giving in a little bit on some things they don't necessarily like to get. Question 13. What compromise did Alexander Hamilton make with James Madison over Hamilton's proposal? So the compromise that was made is Hamilton said, okay, we will have the states pay off the debts. In exchange, we will move the capital to the South. Congress ordered a special district to be laid out between Virginia and Maryland along the banks of the Potomac River. There, George Washington chose the site for the new capital city, later named Washington, D.C., in his honor, and the D.C. stands for District of Columbia. While workers prepared the new city, the nation's capital shifted from New York to Philadelphia. Question 14. Between which two states would the new district for the capital be located? It would be located between Virginia and Maryland. Question number 15. What river would the new capital be located right next to? The Potomac River. The Potomac. Question 16. What have been the three capitals of the United States of America under the United States Constitution? So under the United States Constitution, the first capital was Philadelphia, and then it moved to New York with this compromise that was made in preparation for eventually moving to the final capital, which has been our capital ever since, the District of Columbia, which would eventually be called Washington, D.C., in Washington's honor. The fight for a national bank. Hamilton also asked Congress to create a national bank, the Bank of the United States. The proposed bank would hold government funds and make debt payments. It would also issue a single form of money for use throughout the nation. At that time, different states and banks issued their own currencies. So as you can see here, he was proposing a bank that would give one type of bill or paper currency versus the 13 different paper currencies that were in existence at that time. At that time, different states and banks issued their own currencies. Having a national currency would make trade and all other financial actions much easier. Madison and Jefferson opposed a national bank, believing it would help the wealthy. They argued that the Constitution did not give Congress the power to create a bank. Hamilton believed the Constitution indirectly gave Congress power to create a bank when it gave Congress power to collect taxes and borrow money. Washington agreed, and Congress created the National Bank. So question number 17. What did Hamilton propose Congress should create? A national bank called the Bank of the United States. Question 18. What three benefits did Hamilton see from a national bank? Number 1, that national bank could hold government funds. Number 2, that national bank could make debt payments. And number 3, and maybe most importantly, that one bank could issue a single form of currency for our country rather than having these 13 different currencies from 13 different states, which was very confusing and it made things just a lot harder. Question number 19. What would be a huge benefit of having one national currency? Well, it would make trade and all other financial actions much easier. Question 20. What were the two main reasons why James Madison and Thomas Jefferson were opposed to a national bank? Well, number 1, they believed it would help the wealthy and the common people would be left out. And number 2, they didn't think the bank was constitutional. They didn't think anywhere in the Constitution the government had the power to create such a bank. Question 21. What argument did Hamilton make in defense of the national bank idea? Well, he said, well, yeah, the Constitution indirectly does because the Constitution gives Congress the power to collect taxes and borrow money. Well, they need something to do that with, and that could be a bank. So while it wasn't spelled out directly, he said indirectly they have that power, so they should be able to make a bank. And 22, what did President Washington agree with? Whose side did he take? Washington agreed with Hamilton. And so a Congress decision was made, and they did create a national bank. Tariffs and taxes. Hamilton believed that the United States needed more manufacturing. He proposed high tariffs, taxes on imports. The tariffs would raise money for the government and protect American industries from foreign competition. The South had little industry and opposed such tariffs. Congress passed only low tariffs. Hamilton also called for national taxes to help the government pay the national debt. Congress approved several taxes, including a tax on whiskey made in the United States. And we'll talk about that whiskey tax later on in a different video. And we'll talk about how that affects our nation with the Whiskey Rebellion. But that's a different video. Let's go on to question number 23. Hamilton believed that America needed to have more of what to help our economy? He believed we needed more manufacturing. 24. What is a tariff? A tariff is a tax on imported items or imported goods. We can see an example here. Britain sells cloth for $4. We sell cloth for $4. Well, how do we get Americans to buy American cloth? Well, if you put a 25% tariff on that $4 cloth, now that cloth costs $5 to get from Britain. And so Americans are encouraged to buy American-made stuff instead of the British stuff. And if they do buy the British stuff, well, there's a dollar tax that the American government creates that they can put into their bank. So either way, the American government benefits. We either help our American industries or we get that dollar in taxes that we can use to help pay off the debt that we have. 25. What were two reasons why Hamilton believed a higher tariff would help America? Well, I just went over those, but we'll do it again. Number 1, he believed that it would help Americans buy American-made products. And secondly, if they still bought stuff from overseas, from foreign countries, that tax money created from that tariff could be used to help pay off our national debt. Question number 26. Why were Southerners against a high tariff? Well, Southerners had little industry, so in their minds, this wasn't going to help their people because they didn't have a lot of factories, and this would make stuff that they used to buy from Britain at cheaper costs, they'd have to buy them at higher costs from America, and so this was very frustrating to them, or they'd have to buy more expensive stuff from Britain. So either way, The South saw little benefit from the tariff, and once again they felt, here's another example of us having to do something for the North's benefit. First we had to pay off their debt from the war, and now we got to pay this higher tariff. And it seems like the North is getting their way in a lot of issues. And so you can start to see the resentment in the South against the North. Question 27. Due to Hamilton's recommendation, what beverage did Congress put a tax on? They put a tax on whiskey. And question 28. Due to all of Hamilton's question 28 is on the next slide. There we go. Hamilton's ideas created conflict. Jefferson and Madison worried that Hamilton was building a dangerously powerful government run by the wealthy. They began to organize opposition to Hamilton and the policies he favored. And you can see this chart here, which shows that the people that supported Hamilton had a certain view on how America should be run, and the people that favored Jefferson also had their views on how America should be run. And you can see there were a lot of contrast, a lot of differences between the two men. One Secretary of Treasury, one Secretary of State, two very powerful founding fathers starting to have different views, which leads to question 28. Due to all the ambitious ideas that Hamilton had, what began to happen between Hamilton and Jefferson? You started to see their contrast becoming more and more powerful, and it led to something that we now know as political parties, which Washington did not want us to have, but you started to see that there were two different viewpoints on a lot of issues, and by nature, political parties made sense for the future of America, even though Washington hated the concept of political parties. Well, thank you for watching. Before we go, I have a meme, and it's Thomas Jefferson saying, "I don't always hate people, but when I do, their name is Alexander Hamilton." Thank you so much for watching, and have a great day.